Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. It's just lovely to see you all here for what I think is an absolutely monumental event. My name is Jacqueline Nassy Brown, and I'm a professor of anthropology at Hunter College and the Graduate Center. Having had the joy of working on this event, I now have the challenge of limiting my remarks to a mere welcome. What I really want to offer is a full-fledged lecture on everything I've learned over the last week by reading the 4 books written by today's phenomenal speakers. Dr. Patricia Romney of the Third World Women's Alliance, Ericka Huggins of the Black Panther Party, and Iris Morales of the Young Lords. I will save that lecture for another day. For now, please allow me to share an anecdote that underscores the importance of today's event and reflects the reason that so many people have poured their hearts into producing it. Every year, I teach a course on racism and resistance in the United States that goes by the misleading title, Cultural Diversity in the United States. And every year, without fail, I show a documentary about the Young Lords called Pa'lante, Siempre Pa'lante, which was made by one of our guests, Iris Morales. A few years ago, a Puerto Rican student came up to me after the film and expressed outrage that she had never known a single bit of this history before. She demanded of me, "Why is this the first time I'm learning this?" Her devastating query echoes my own reactions upon reading the remarkable books of our phenomenal guests today. Time and again, I was both angered and dumbstruck, contemplating the silences that surrounded social justice work that these and countless other women did and continue to do today, whether it has been, as in the case of the Black Panthers, serving the people, body and soul. Black Panther Party was, by the way, 66% female. Or whether it was in the authoring of intersectional manifestos such as Double Jeopardy, To Be Black and Female, a treatise that Frances Beale of the Third World Women's Alliance wrote well before the word intersectionality was coined. And this text then was studied by the Women's Caucus of the Young Lords. Do you see why today's event is so monumental? The appearance here today of these feminist activists of color and their appearance together, it's a true gift to us all. Their powerful books, which we can share with our students, our families, and our communities, are even greater gifts. If I were to do full justice to these sisters' work, accomplishments, and accolades, I would cut too far into the precious little time we have to hear from them. With that apology, let me first introduce Dr. Patricia Romney. An early and leading member of the Third World Women's Alliance, she is the author of We Were There, the Third World Women's Alliance and the Second Wave, published in 2021 by the Feminist Press. Ericka Huggins served in the Los Angeles and Oakland offices of the Black Panther Party and was the founder of its New Haven office. After being a political prisoner for 2 years, Ericka became the director of the famed Oakland Community School. She is the author of Comrade Sisters, Women of the Black Panther Party, published in 2022 by ACC Art Books. Iris Morales was a leading member of the Young Lords and was a leading feminist voice within that organization, and was the producer, writer, and director of the film I just mentioned, Pa'lante, Siempre Pa'lante. She is the author of 2 books, Through the Eyes of Rebel Women, The Young Lords, 1969-1976, published by Red Sugarcane Press, and Revisiting Her Stories, The Young Lords Party, published this year, again by Red Sugarcane Press. It should be shouted from the rooftops that each of the 4 books I just mentioned lifts up the voices of ordinary women of color, whose labors you would never know about were it not for the care that these well-known women have taken in documenting their names and their labors, inserting them into the histories of radicalism that tend to be narrated through masculinist and white female lenses. All 3 of these sisters have long worked as educators within a slew of grassroots and academic contexts. Before introducing our eminent moderator for today, let me say that today's program would not be possible without the wholehearted and generous support of the former president of Hunter College, Jennifer Robb. I don't see Jennifer here, but Jennifer, mil gracias. CENTRO is, of course, another major force behind this event. CENTRO is currently celebrating its 50th birthday. Felicidades. I wish to thank its former directora, Dr. Yarimar Bonilla, for her support of this event. And I'd also like to use this auspicious occasion to welcome Centro's new directora, Dr. Yumaira Figueroa Vasquez, who will serve as moderator today. Dr. Figueroa Vasquez is author of the award-winning book, Decolonizing Diasporas, Radical Mappings of Afro-Atlantic Literature, published by Northwestern in 2020. With her tremendous commitment to Puerto Rican studies, especially from Afro-Boricua points of view, we have much to look forward to under her leadership. As she has written, quote, ethnic studies is a lifeline, an insurgent emancipatory project, a mode of survival in the fullest sense, and a necessary practice that should it be taken seriously, would lead to a transformation of knowledge itself and enable liberatory political and social projects to be undertaken in earnest with the seriousness they deserve, unquote. Right here and right now with you and our eminent speakers and this audience full of our precious students, we are indeed taking our communities and knowledge about them very seriously. This program will last for until about 7, after which time we'll have questions from the audience for about 20 minutes or so. Bienvenidos. Welcome.
Group 1, Channel 4. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. And I want to thank Professor Brown for the beautiful introduction, for envisioning this event, and for making it happen here at Hunter No Small Feat. CENTRO is so proud and so thankful to be a partner with you in doing this work. My name is Yumaira Figueroa, and I'm the new director of CENTRO. And I am so honored to be here tonight with these 3 luminaries. It is no small thing to be sitting here in this room with living history. I am so lucky, and I think we are all so grateful to be here in your presence and to learn from you, from both lessons from the 60s and 70s, as the event says, but also the lessons from right now, things that we can take away from the kind of life of force of love and resistance that you have led. So we have some questions that we have prepared. We've been in conversation about this, and we keep having our own mini events in preparation for this event. And so I'm gonna start with one of the things that we began talking about in our first meeting, which was the question of complex coalition building. And I wanna talk about that because we're stepping into the territory of not just feminists, but women of color feminist politics and practices. And complex coalition building was something that you all kind of talked about as one of like the base, the foundation of this political work. And so it was not just a practice, but it was also political ethics. And part of that was a relationality, right? Being in relation to others and to one another. So I want to just first say that the party platforms are gonna be here on loop throughout. So you can kind of look up the party platforms for each of these organizations to see what they believed in, what they stood for. But the question that I have for you all is if you could share for me a little bit about that question of complex coalition building, of relationality. What did you stand for? What did you believe in? What inspired you? What moved you? And how did your organizations relate to each other?
Do you want me to start?
Please.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for the organizers of this event. And I'm deeply grateful to be here with my panelists. I don't want to take up a lot of time by thanking the long list of people that have to be thanked, but thank you for your introduction as well. I guess my response to that question is that revolution is not done by one organization or one group of people. You know, a revolution is made by masses of people. And we understood that. And I'll speak in terms of the Young Lords. The Young Lords formed in Chicago 2 years after the Black Panthers. We were learning from the Black Panthers, as we had learned from the Civil Rights Movement. So we understood that we needed to work together for things to happen. And in New York City, the Panther office and the Young Lords office were not too far away from each other. As a matter of fact, the Black Panther Party just had a street naming about last week or 2 weeks ago. And so we could actually walk to each other's office, and we developed personal relationships as well as political relationships. But in everything that we did, whether it was the breakfast program or health screenings or protests or takeover of buildings, we did together. And we also had a major demonstration that I want to mention because I'm wearing my Puerto Rican flag today. And that was one of the issues that was very concerning to the Young Lords, was the issue of the colonization of Puerto Rico. And we had support in that because we were all socialist and anti-imperialist organizations. So we came together on that work. But the Young Lords organized a great demonstration in 1970 to the United Nations to raise the issue of the colonization of Puerto Rico, and everybody was there. The Panthers were there, Third World Newsreel was there, Youth Against War and Fascism was there, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party was there. I mean, everybody was there. Sylvia Rivera writes about it. She was there. So our coalition work was not something that we thought about, it was something that we lived. And in all of our work, we were learning from each other. So that was very important. You know, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have mobile phones. So we read Double Jeopardy, for example. And when one person got it and then passed it on to the rest of us, and then we were learning from each other constantly. So coalition work was a lived reality. And what bound us, as Sister Ericka likes to say, is love of the people, because that is what motivated all of us to get involved. In my case, I like to say I got involved because I wanted to see justice. And justice and love go together.
I absolutely agree, Edie. You know, the other issue that was so clear to us is that we knew who the enemy was. We knew what we were fighting. The issues of racism and classism and sexism, all of those things that we talked about in the Third World Women's Alliance from an intersectional perspective, we all agreed about. As I was reviewing our platforms, so much overlap. You know, we really, in principle, did not disagree. My first experience of being in a demonstration was at the People's Church with the Young Lords Party. And I was there also when we marched to the UN against colonization. Eric and I have talked about the West Coast Third World Women's Alliance and the way they served as physicians for the Young Lords Party, for the Black Panther Party. And so we were always connecting around our common enemy, which was capitalism, racism, and basically injustice.
I was reading that beautiful, whatever it is right there in the back. I don't know what to call it, but it's beautiful. And it's the 4 essential freedoms. And the third one is the freedom from want. That really touched me. I can't read the rest of it, but that's enough. The freedom from want. And in each instance, all of our movements were wanting that. We actually didn't do a whole lot of focus, though some of our rhetoric might seem like it did, we didn't do a lot of focus on specific parts of that enemy crowd. But we were very much about giving people what they deserve, the basics of life. And it wasn't just the Young Lords and the Third World Women's Alliance and the Black Panther Party. It was Ivor Cohen and the Yellow Peril and the American Indian Movement and all the other indigenous organizations that were moving right along with us. And quite often, if we were to look at all of their platforms and principles, they would be similar because we all wanted the same thing, to be able to live without harm and raise our children without the fear of that harm. And that's why we were hated by the people in power. So I think that part of the coalition building was that we were similar and we knew it, but we also protected one another. We showed up at trials to support. And I want to tell one story that I promised Patricia I would tell. In 1970, I don't remember what year, 75, 76, the largest African-American Baptist church in Oakland, which was also a community center, because that's what it needed to be, put out a press release. J. Alfred Smith put out a press release that said that in Oakland, California, in that year, the rates of infant mortality and maternal morbidity were higher than the rates in the poorest of African countries. Whether I believed what he said or not, it rang true, because our county hospital, well, I don't have to explain, and our discrimination in medicine made it really difficult. Not to mention living in conditions of poverty. Anyway, I sat there thinking, who will I call? What will I do? And I remembered that someone told me about, and I didn't really know them. I didn't need to. I already loved them because they existed. The Third World Women's Alliance. And I rang them up and I spoke to a woman. The group in Northern California was mostly Asian Pacific Islander women. And I said, these are the stats. We're going to the county supervisors to complain about Highland Hospital's OBGYN department. Will you join us? Will you support us? It was an enthusiastic yes. And they showed up with us at the county supervisors meeting with moms, pregnant moms, with little ones, and with all kinds of people. We filled the county supervisors' room, and women got to use their voices and speak. But the Third World Women's Alliance helped us to organize what became the Coalition Against Infant Mortality. And we changed the OBGYN department at Highland. Okay, it needs to be changed again. That's how it is. But that was then, and this is now, and we can do that. And I find that it's really important for activists who are not up in the decades like us to recognize the importance of putting aside what we do not like about another organization, what we wish were more similar, and look at the connections, because we're all living under the same oppressive forces. So thank you. Thank you for that question. And thank you everybody for being here. And thank you, Jackie, for that. introduction. That was so beautiful. And thank you to Kimberly and the vast team of people that have made all of this happen. And you're all over the place right now. And this has been a labor of love for months. So thank you very much. And it was Jackie's idea. She didn't say that.
Right. I mean, you just said something right now. It's like, we can do that, right? In terms of like
We can do it
making
now.
this change, but we can do it now, and we can believe it because it was done before. But if we don't remember that it was done before, to do it now seems impossible, right? The maternal mortality rate right now for Black women is so high in this country. But the idea that, you know, we addressed it before, and no positive change is going to be permanent, obviously. Power structures don't want that, right?
Right.
But we can do it. You did it.
Right. That day in the county supervisor's office room, the board room, we had a friend on the county board of supervisors. He's long transitioned from this life, but he supported us when one of his so-called colleagues said, well, if you people would stop, well, see, we were done by you people. If you people would stop eating all those hamburgers, maybe your children, he jumped. I thought he was going to jump on him, but he was a judge and a county board of supervisors member, but he read him.
Mhm.
You cannot say that. These women deserve better treatment. So our showing up may help other people to show up.
Mhm.
And that's another thing. When we are in a silo formation of any kind, we're barring people from stepping forward and contributing to the upliftment of humanity.
Mhm.
I wanted to echo that point that one of the important things about coalition work is that we were multi-issue oriented. We weren't just in a silo dealing with one issue. We were multi-issue oriented, and our orientation was, what do the people need? Which is exactly what you said. So if the issue was coerced sterilization, we worked together on that. We did a lot of work on that. Whatever the issue, if the issue was health, and health was a big issue. Health was a big issue, which it still is a huge issue. And so we had numerous takeovers of hospitals and such, in addition to the medical programs, the screening, TB, anemia, lead poisoning, all of the screenings that we did, we went door to door. So if that's what was needed in the community, then that's where we were.
Yeah, I want to add to that also that although particularly people are aware of the Young Lords Party and the Black Panther Party, and some also the Third World Women's Alliance, there were so many organizations that were working in the community. I think of El Comité up on the Upper West Side. I think of Latin Action and Latin Union, where we at that time would go around and give test the babies for ear infections and coach women on how to take care of their children. So there were so many, and again, we worked together to promote the kind of role we wanted to see.
Mhm. I mean, talk about love, being fueled by love of community, right? And of your people, and one another. And I think that that is a kind of visionary love, right? For what you feel, what is rooted in you, but also what you want to see in the world. And so you act upon it. And one of the things about the complex coalition building, about the kinds of ways that you're able to relate to each other. First, I'm blown away because I remember when we were having our first meeting, one of the questions that the deputy director of CENTRO had was like, how did you meet each other? And you all laughed because some of you didn't meet each other till decades later. But what I'm thinking about are these moments of overlap, right? These organizations were not silos. They were always overlapping. And that there are moments where you met again and met again and met again and maybe met and never knew. And I think that that is just such a beautiful way to envision the work that you've done in the world. And maybe many of us have met you over and over again without actually meeting you, by reading the work, by seeing the films, by witnessing that living history. But I also think it's a particularly feminist politic, that complex coalition building, because I don't think that an organization, no shade, led by men would be able to engage in that level of like complexity and care and love and let that move it forward. I think patriarchy really blocks so much of that loving work. And what is interesting is that many times this revolutionary work is overrepresented by men, right? Overrepresented its history, men ran it, they created it, they birthed it, they moved it, right? But in reality, we know that so many of the women did much of the heavy lifting, much of the organizing, right? And much of the like labor that allow these organizations to be visible, to be seen, and to do the work that they did. So I would love to hear from you. How did women and also queer people, right, shape the vision of justice and of liberation in each of your organizations?
Maybe I'll start with the Third World Women's Alliance, which emerged out of SNCC. And many of the women, Fran Beal, Gwen Patton, and others who were members of SNCC and working in the South told many stories about what they were doing, answering the phones, typing. Gwen Patton had a beautiful story about how she had to dress up in camouflage herself and take some things to people at night. It was always behind closed doors. It was always quiet. The men were always put out front and speaking. And that is one of the reasons why they brought to SNCC a platform raising many of the issues about women and women's leadership. And because in the late 1960s, moving to 1970, SNCC was beginning to be more fragile, out of SNCC rose the Third World Women's Alliance. And certainly in that venue, in that arena, part of what we were trying to do was to advance women's leadership. I always remember that Fran Beal, who's the most well-known, I think, among us, anytime she'd be called to speak, she would appoint somebody else to go. Brenda Beato, you go. Pat Romney, you go. So she would be developing our leadership all along the way. And our newspaper, as you know, Triple Jeopardy, had such a great influence to raise women's issues in front of the movement. When we went to 1970 to the Women's March on Fifth Avenue, we were almost not permitted to march because we went to this march with a banner that said "Free Angela Davis." And the people from the movement there said, this has nothing to do with women's liberation. And we said, it has everything to do with the women's liberation we're talking about. So we founded our own organization, and I think had a big influence on the movement in that way.
I mean, literally liberate a woman, right? Like literally.
Right. Right. Turn it over to Edith and Ericka, who have a lot to say about their leadership and their organization.
I just wanted to say one thing about the second half of your question, and that is, as we say, queer people. And, in this room, if people were open, and I said, hey, how many people in this room are queer? Even if nobody raised their hand, we know you're there. We know you're there. And that's how we were about it in the Black Panther Party. We didn't make a big whoop about it outside of the party. I wish we actually had, but we were so busy trying to stay. I don't want to assume that everybody knows everything, but I want to say we were stalked violently by the government. So we were paying a lot of attention on staying alive day to day and the things that were most important to people. However, people would come to our offices and say that their need was, at that time, especially trans people, to not be beaten, to not be harmed, to not be raped. And then we work with incarcerated people. We had a busing to prisons program. It's obvious why we had to have that. And there should be many of those today, and they could happen. But anyway, back to what I was saying is that in the Black Panther Party, we were so open about sexuality. You know why? Because we thought we were going to die in the morning. No, we would actually say that. I'm amazed I'm alive. Are you?
Absolutely.
And
Aren't supposed to live past 30.
no. And so who we loved was the least of a problem. However, it's interesting to make a note that in the Black Panther Party, the women were more, as we say, out about their sexuality than men, because there was this taboo for men, especially men of color, right? But they were there, just like Bayard Rustin was there. Bayard. I just want to see so many books written about him.
A beautiful article in the New York Times just 3 days ago about Bayard Rustin, if you look it up.
Yes, and so we think that when we read history, which I hope you'll do by reading those books and many others, when we read history and we don't see that people of the Black Panther Party talked about being queer, just know the truth. We did. And as often, because we were. The gay Democratic Club of Oakland wanted a member of the Black Panther Party to speak on behalf of some person they were putting into office. For us, electoral politics wasn't like at all like what we do these days. It was, can you get somebody in there who loves us? You know, can you have a person who'll make a decision on our behalf? At any rate, I was the person sent to speak from the party to the Gay Democratic Club. That was 1970. I don't even know. It was so long ago. And then there is Huey Newton's beautiful kind of essay on the importance of the women's movement and the Gay Liberation Front, which is what it was called then. The importance of it. He was writing as much to men in the party as he was to men everywhere and to women everywhere. So that was 1970. I don't know any other man of color writing such a thing. Well, maybe James Baldwin.
Yeah.
But, you know, so we didn't have that. And then I think that the young lords took it a step further with machismo.
Yes.
But you were saying earlier that you didn't get that
Yeah.
far with
Well, I think
sexuality.
it relates to how women were viewed. And the way that women were viewed and gay people at the time was almost similar. After I was mentioning earlier to Ericka that in 1970, after Huey gave that speech, he also spoke at the People's Convention in Philadelphia, where there were, I don't know, 10,000, 12,000 people from across the country to rewrite the US Constitution, by the way, no small task. And so I was there with Pablo and Denise. And when we came back, Pablo wrote a piece in the Palante newspaper, influenced by Huey's article, and also by the fact that that year, as Minister of Information, he had been involved in talking to different organizations, you know, gay organizations at that time. And he writes almost an appeal to the membership and to the public to accept the fact, or to understand that this is part of our transformation and of a society that we want to build, where men and gay people, lesbians at that time, what the terms were used, and that they were part of the society that we wanted to create. But that was not the majority view in the organization. It's interesting that you say you didn't talk about it, because we didn't talk about it either, right, within the organization. Like, we knew who was gay, but we just didn't talk about it. It was kind of accepted. And there was one instance where in Puerto Rico, we had a retreat. And by that time we had an office in Puerto Rico, and the gay members in Puerto Rico were complaining about the rising homophobia in the organization. And members were also complaining in that same caucus, in that retreat, about the rising racism in the organization. So in my analysis, I think that there was a tug happening between people who had a revolutionary vision of where we wanted to go and people who did not, right? Who wanted to tinker with the elements of the system that they felt were oppressive, but were not really seeking a transformation of society. And I think that that's really where the woman's contribution is important, because sometimes you'll see people will see photographs, or they'll say, oh, women were there as a representational issue. But what's really important, and why I decided to write the book, and it shows in Patricia's book and in Ericka's, is that we wanted people to know that we had a different vision for what society could be, and that we were about transformation, and that was what our work was meant to be.
There's also something about living that politics in a time of revolution. And you mentioned, like, it's not just these three organizations, there's multiple organizations, some that we've never even heard of, right, that are active at this time. And y'all were, not y'all, excuse me, you all were. Y'all. My mother would be so ashamed. Con permiso, ustedes, yeah. You were openly socialists and openly revolutionaries in a time where these political ideologies were held in contempt. I think my original word when we met was demonized, right? How did you feel standing in the middle of that climate? And what does it mean to you now to see yourselves, to think back to that young person standing in that climate? I remember us talking, like, you know, I don't think it's fearlessness, because I can imagine how scared you might have been, but there has to be some courage deep in you to stand in that time period, to have those politics and to wear them and live them. What was that like?
How much time do we?
We got all the time you need, baby. Let's How much time do we have? 15 minutes. 15.
I remembered something that I don't like remembering. It was a day, a year before he was actually assassinated, that John Huggins and I were riding down Slauson Boulevard in Los Angeles that had just been widened so that riot tanks could come down.
And it's still wide, I mean, widened, and I mean, it's huge.
Lanes wider. And we were coming from a funeral of a comrade who'd been shot by the police. This was routine. And we were in John's little hoopty car. I was pregnant. I was pregnant so that there was no doubt I was pregnant. And 7 or 8 months, I can't really remember. And the police stopped us for driving 25 miles an hour in a 35-mile zone. That was their reason. And then they pulled us out of the car and dumped things onto the ground, looking for what I don't know, partially harassment, but also their routine was to look for some kind of contraband. Nothing was there. But they spread Eagle John and stuck a 357 Magnum to his head, you know, just, and I'm pregnant and I'm scared as shit. I know there's a child here. I think she's heard that word before, has she? And I know what I need to do. See, this is what courage is for me. You know the fear is there and you do what is necessary. So I backed myself, it's at night in South Central. So it's Black and brown folks. And I see windows open in this big apartment building, big brick apartment building. And I back my body against the walls and I began to scream upward into the windows. Help, they're trying to kill us. They're going to kill us. And people came to the windows and hung their heads out and looked at the police. And then this, I just have to say, I don't call myself an elder Black woman, but every time an older Black woman says something like what I'm going to tell you, it just touches my heart. She yelled at the police, "Do y'all have any home training? Look at her. She's pregnant. She's big, but you gonna kill her?" And then people in the other windows were like, "Yeah, what's wrong with y'all? That's messed up." It was like it was amazing. And they took the gun away from John's head. He said, "You know, you're not gonna shoot him. So just put the gun down." And I didn't need to yell anymore. I didn't need to worry that they were going to kill my baby. I wasn't really fearful for me. I thought they were going to kill John and the baby. Does that make sense? Fear is so irrational. And like roaches when the lights are turned on, they scurried. They went straight to their cars and sped away. And John was saved. Of course, the FBI killed him the next year. But that's what fearlessness is. You do what is necessary in that moment with the people that you're with and the circumstances that you're in the skin you're in, with whatever kind of knowledge you don't even know you have. So it's a story that explains it.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I love the idea of standing in that courage and then the chorus of people coming, right?
It's always the people.
The chorus of
They're there. And we think if we sit in our ivory towers of activism thinking that we're going to save the people, we're wrong. We're part of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that way. And whoever that woman was, because she put her head back in the window when she'd done what she had to do,
Mm-hmm.
I think of her all the time, you know. Yes, and it's like that. I think if each of us thought of a period of time in history where the community came out, there would be the beauty of how people work together, not how we work against each other.
I'd like to speak for a moment about the socialism piece, because we were unabashedly socialist, and what that meant for us was providing for the people of freedom from want, as Ericka mentioned a moment ago and is on the wall back there. We were seeing the burning of the Bronx. We were living in poverty, we were living in fear. And we knew and we saw in other countries the ability to effect change. When some of us from the Third World Women's Alliance, many different times, went to Cuba and saw and cut sugarcane and picked fruit and saw how society could be transformed. Our hopes were raised about the possibility of socialism in this country. And we have lost a lot of that conversation. We've lost a lot of the conversation about capitalism and economics, and yet poverty is worsening. It broke my heart when I was teaching at a college in Massachusetts, when I would see students forming a Black student association and a Latina student association and an Asian student association. And particularly the Black association was one of students who considered themselves to be African-American and others who were Afro-Caribbean or African, right? A lot of balkanization. And I would think about the communities in Springfield where crime was rampant, and even in our own community in Amherst, where poverty existed, and there was never a conversation about economics. You know, I've been fortunate to be able to travel several times to Finland and Sweden, and to witness the kinds of benefits of social programming, where people who are in Finland, if you're pregnant, not only do you get a year's paid leave from your job, but you're guaranteed your own position when you return to your employment. The people get, 4 weeks minimum vacation. We have none of that. We're still talking, you'll see in the Third World Women's Alliance platform that we were talking about free childcare. We still don't have that. It's one of the most expensive, one of the largest expenses that young families have is taking care of children. So I think we really have lost the class, capitalism, economic piece of our movement. I'd love to see us get that back. The core message of socialist economies is from each according to his ability or her ability, to each according to their need. And we need to revive that conversation.
Wow, powerful, both of you. Thank you. You made me think about the economic piece. And I think one of our strengths of the movement and of our organizations was that we were working among the poorest people. And we were committed to that. And we were committed to working with working mothers, working people, poor people. And that's where our focus was and the issues that came from that. So it's interesting you talk about the free daycare, because when the Young Lords and the Panthers and the Health Revolutionary Unity movement took over Lincoln Hospital, one of our demands that actually came from working class African-American and Puerto Rican women was that the health facility provide free childcare, a free childcare facility paid by the employer near the hospital, right? So that was like a visionary demand compared to where we are today. And that came out of the Health Revolutionary Unity movement, which was an organization of African-American and Puerto Rican, primarily hospital workers, influenced by DRUM, that was an organization of revolutionary auto workers in Detroit. So we're back to the coalition and, full circle. and the working class, which we all were focused on. You made me think about something else and now I forgot it, but maybe it'll come back to me in 2 minutes. Thank you.
There's two things I want to pick up. Thank you. There's two things I want to pick up here that you're saying that I think are so important. One is the kind of question, we're going back to the coalition building, the siloing, right? And so you're talking about the kind of balkanization of, these different student organizations or different kind of political orientations, or maybe not even that, right? Questions around identity and identity politics. And one of the most powerful lessons that I learned from like studying the life of women of color, feminist organizers, and thinking about even some of the work of Audre Lorde and some of those documentaries, one of the documentation of these conferences, these feminist conferences, you see the need for women of color of different groups to step aside and speak to each other alone, right? Indigenous women, Latina women, right? Asian women, Pacific Islander women, and they're coming to this conference together and they're like, okay, we need to talk. But then what happens after that is they all come back together to share. So it's that second part. So it's not that the balkanization or the identity politics or the organizing around particular forms of racial, ethnic, cultural, et cetera, experiences is necessarily a bad thing, but that when you don't actually come back to connect with each other, right? You stay siloed, right? And then you're not addressing some of the common forms of oppression that you're facing. So I think that's so key. The other thing that I wanted to point out is, I remember teaching the kind of party platforms, and I was talking to you earlier about one of my classes. And I remember a few years ago I was teaching, and when we got to the question of healthcare, one of the students said, why do they think that they deserve free healthcare? This is a student of color, right? And so when you mentioned that, and it brought me back to that moment where I did not even know where to put myself in that classroom. I'm like, what did you say? Where are your parents? And I realized that it wasn't the student's fault. We're coming up in a place where the idea that healthcare, the idea of free tuition, right? The idea that we should not have to pay to live for every moment. My mother recently asked me, Jomaira, did you know that I saw that rent didn't always exist? And I was like, yeah, And she was like, Jomaira, because you study, can you find out who invented rent? ¿Y por qué? Porque yo vi que en muchos años atrás no había renta, que la gente no pagaba renta, tú sabes, los indígenas y la otra gente, ¿y quién inventó la renta? And I'm like, I'm on it, I'll go look it up, I'll find it for you. But that is also the kind of question of the imagination, right? So that the imagination, the radical imagination that you captured in the work, that there are some rights, inalienable rights that we have as human beings. I think there's something so important about that. And to turn that around, like how can we like bring that to our students, to our families, to our communities? Like, you have the right to live, right? Not the right to have to work to live, to pay to live for any little chance of freedom. There's something there. I don't know.
Oh, I definitely want to say something about that because it relates to another thing that we did in our organization, all the organizations, was education. We very much believe, because none of us were born socialist in this country, right? It was a process. It was through experiences. It was through analysis. It was through studying. And our education was weekly classes. Our education was also our newspapers. If just read the newspapers, you'll see how much it's chock full of, stuff that you have to go back and reference today. It was also events, either cultural events or commemoration events. It was also knocking on people's doors to say something was going to happen, or, an event in the community, or some bill, or the hospital was threatening to close or something. So the Young Lords also had a radio program, We did it bilingually. Sometimes our Spanish was not that great, but we were trying. And we were in constant communication and education with the community. And I think that's lost today. I know that sometimes when I come out of the train and somebody's going to give me a flyer, I always go back to that time and I want to accept the flyer because I think it's going to educate me, but often it just wants to sell something.
Mm. Mm.
I know we're running out of time, but thank you, Iris. I was just thinking about how the over 60 community survival programs of the Black Panther Party were socialism in action. Because actually what we said was, oh, government won't feed the babies. We'll feed them. Did we know how to run a breakfast program? No, we didn't. We relied on what we were learning in our weekly political education classes. Taught a lot of those classes taught by women, by the way, I want to say, as well as men. And when we realized how discriminatory healthcare was, and if you could get to a doctor, what you had to do to get there was so awful. It would take a good portion of a very small paycheck to get from your home to the county hospital because you couldn't afford to go to a private hospital. Point is that's why the People's Free Medical Clinics were created. We didn't tell people that we were socialists and that our attitude was more communist than capitalist. We didn't have big arguments and discussions with people, even in other organizations, about all that. It doesn't land. We did it.
Mm-hmm.
We just did it. And I look back at it and I laugh with my comrades, and possibly you feel the same way. Like, how we do all that? We were like 19 years old. Partly we did it because we were so young, but we had been trained to study movements all over the world and look at the successes as well as the hard times and the failures. But we knew that if people didn't have food and healthcare, they could not live. So that's where we started. The very first of our programs was to end police brutality. Why? Because we wanted to live. And the very first newspaper was about an act of police brutality against Black people. But we all knew that it wasn't just Black people, it was all people of color and poor white people.
Mm-hmm.
A film you should see is called The First Rainbow Coalition. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. That was Fred Hampton's wave. Some politician later said it was his wave. It was Fred Hampton,
Mm-hmm.
who said, you know, white people and brown people and Black people should work together. Why can't we work together? And so we did. The Young Patriots, I forgot to mention that as them as another, and the White Panther Party as another set of organizations, the Great Panthers, they were older. It was so vast. But I want to say that our study of socialism and communism way back before Marx
Mm-hmm.
and the socialists were writing about it, we studied everybody and took from everything what we needed to serve the people, body and soul.
Mm-hmm. That's the reading that we were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have here your recommended, like if it was 3 books that we have to read what they are. I mean, we have your 3 books here, but also the political education is one about intensive study, and then dovetailing that study with lived experience, right?
I remembered what I wanted to say earlier.
Yes.
Another aspect of our work, which was extremely important, was our internationalism. We very much built relationships with organizations in other parts of the world, because as was said earlier, we understood that there were movements in other parts of the world, and we were studying them. We were also building relationships. And for us in the Young Lords, the issue of Puerto Rico, of course, was, very important to us. And it was a way of us introducing what imperialism, what US imperialism looks like, and why Puerto Ricans had come to this country. Because believe me, we didn't want to leave that beautiful island. And I still believe today, because you wanted us to make some statements related to how all of this relates to today, is we have more Puerto Ricans in the United States today than in Puerto Rico. And we have so many immigrants coming to this country. But it's talked about like people just land here, and the role of US policies, imperialist policies in Latin America, in the Caribbean, and in Puerto Rico is not discussed. And I think that's something even within our movements that we have to bring to the conversation.
We are running out of time, and I just have one last question before we open up to everyone. And I think this is about thinking in the longue durée, right, of one's life. And I want to know if you could share with us where your politics have taken you. What has that journey been like? It's not like your revolutionary ideologies and revolutionary ethics stopped anywhere in time, but you're living it. So what does that living look like?
Well, my end in the Young Lords was very traumatic. And so for about a year, I think I was traumatized with what happened. I had spent 5 years of my life in the organization, and the ending, because of the internal dynamics and also because of the reality of what COINTELPRO did. And that's something that we haven't really talked about on the panel yet. But I got my Freedom of Information Act file, and I was, I was able to see exactly the role that the FBI and the US government played, so sometimes people think that activists or revolutionaries of that time are just saying stuff to be dramatic, right? But it's real. And what I found most interesting, and actually I'm most proud of in my FBI file, I don't share this too often, but apparently they kept trying to talk to me, and I knew that they had come to my door several times, and I would talk to them through the door and basically say, I have nothing to say to you. But apparently in my FBI file, they said that the agent reported that he was trying to get close to me, but that I always seemed to be surrounded by people, right? He couldn't get close to me. So then there were a couple of other reports in there, because sometimes either they were too lazy or they weren't being paid enough, I don't know what, but they would just take clippings of articles that we wrote and include it in the file. And then that would be the report for that week or that whatever. Anyway, a couple of time later, they wrote that they were going to stop surveilling me. And they wrote that they didn't think that I would be disloyal to the Young Lords.
Yeah.
So I love that,
Not
that
you
I have
hiring the FBI out. They were like, we tired of following her.
So, so after that, ending and realizing, you know, I being traumatized, it was, and also there was no organization. One of the things were that we had these organizations that were so like family, and they were so powerful, and they, you know, they gave us like everything that we needed in terms of a vision and a way to carry it out, not just to talk about it in an ivory tower, but a way to actually live it and to see concrete change and to have those experiences with the people joining us, whether it's 10,000 people or 5, and then trying to figure out, so what do I do next? So I went back to education, which was, you know, I was in the education ministry, so it made sense to continue in the education. And I loved the exchange with community. And I worked as a drug addiction counselor and then decided to go to law school. And in that course of that, I became interested in the intersection of media as a tool for social change. And I developed some training programs for young people in media literacy and video production. And then, you know, they say those who don't do teach, right? So the kids called me out on it, and they said, well, because, you know, they knew I was working on this documentary, they said, you should produce it yourself, right? You tell us that we should learn this, how to do videos, because it's important to tell our stories. So why don't you tell your story, right? And that's how I got into it, right? So so I continue to do that and other media work, you know, protesting at a time. Now it's a big issue, but at the time we were protesting, you know, stereotypes, stereotypical representations of people of color in the media and television, and I became involved in that. And then I continued in education reform projects, everything really around education and working with young people. And then today I'm publishing books through Red Sugar Cane Press to continue to educate everybody.
So, like Edie's, I went into education. I taught for 10 years at Hampshire College, which I think people know is a kind of radical leftist institution. And my favorite course that I taught was a course called The Psychology of Oppression. And in that course, it was an intersectional course in which we looked at class and race and gender. Since that time, I also taught a psychology of racism course, but I remain loyal to that intersectional perspective. I did that for quite a number of years, and then left academia and really began to do a lot of consulting around equity in colleges and universities. I spent probably 5 years working on an initiative with a colleague around diversifying the faculty. And we were able to accomplish a lot at a number of schools up in the New England region, and even did some consulting to search committees, and eventuated in the hiring of some women of color in positions of the presidencies. So that was a lot of what I did. I also now am doing a lot of leadership coaching with young, what I call today's young leaders. And many of them, interestingly, are women of color. So a lot of Latina, a lot of Black women who are rising in the academy. And then I also do with my husband work around organizing elders. We're on the board of a group called Amherst Neighbors, which provides support to elders as they aged, so that we age in community. We have also, with high recognition of teachers, there was a 6th grade teacher, Roger Wallace, who taught two of our children. And so we've started a foundation to honor excellence in teaching in the elementary schools in Amherst. So again, trying to, we had this beautiful shirt that we used to have that said, there's no throne high enough for the teachers, the nurses, and the caregivers. And so that kind of worker orientation has continued to stay with me.
It's so wonderful to hear everything that you're doing and that you're doing. And I wouldn't have known it if I wasn't here. So thank you. And I was thinking about the trauma you talked about. And the book Comrade Sisters, the women don't talk about it. They love the fact that we intentionally used their stories, their voices, to talk about what they loved, about what they did. So thank you. I really am touched by the courage of what people went through, that they have resolved in some way for themselves, because you're such a bright light. And you seem to have followed just this beautiful golden road in front of you. And I think that something about my trajectory is I could feel all over the place, but it's similar to both of you. And that is that, I was incarcerated for 2 years and 2 months and some days. And while I was there, a Puerto Rican friend of mine, Milagros, and I formed something called Sister Love Collective. It's a long story. I don't have time to tell it here. But what we did was get women, it was clandestine, but we made sure to get women, particularly prostitutes, because if there's no demand, there's no supply. Lawyers. Because the lawyer team I had was the Black Panther Party's lawyer team, and I knew they would help. We also got women, we were able to help women get their children back that were taken from. I don't know if you understand what that's like when you go to prison as a woman. And then, so after the party was over, I thought, what will I do? Because we worked with incarcerated people while I was in the party, and I thought, I will keep going back into the prisons. You really never leave there once you're there. A part of your heart stays there for the people that never returned home. And so my particular thing was the juvenile institute, the juvenile prisons. I do not use the term juvenile justice in any kind of sentence, because they're babies. And that work led me back to teaching, actually, because in the Black Panther Party, I was the director of the Oakland Community School, which was a community-based, child-centered, tuition-free, 3 meals a day and medical care. Melanie Turvalon of the Third World Women's Alliance helped with that. For any child within reach who could make it to our school. The Black Panther Party conceived it, and I did that for 9 years. So I thought, if I did that with little or no anything, I could teach again. And a friend asked me to teach women and gender studies at Cal State East Bay. And I said, I don't have all those letters behind my name. She said, yeah, but you have lived experience. Go teach. And that was from that, it led me to go back to school and get a master's in sociology, because it's a great way of looking at how people work together or do not, and how systems are created. And so then I began teaching, and then I realized that there is nothing like stepping out of the classroom and being with people like I used to in the Black Panther Party. I met all kinds of people all over the country and all over the world, actually. And so at some point, I got introduced to the HIV/AIDS pandemic and worked at the height of the pandemic in San Francisco at the famous Shanti Project, and worked in communities of color to build programs for women and their babies and for intravenous drug users and everybody else, with a specific focus on trans people. This was in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So all of that has led me to do now what I do. I don't teach anymore because it's a shame what adjunct professors get. You cannot mix a bean and a rice on that salary. And I don't want everything taken out of my heart and head with a PhD. I just decided not to do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying I couldn't do it. I think that thing about our lived experience is so important. That's what I'm getting at. And so the work at Shanti Project helped me to do some work that I did during this pandemic, the parallel pandemics of the last 3 years. So in other words, I do what's right in front of me, whatever that is. And traveling and speaking wherever I'm invited, like here, is my work. And I was working in JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And then I decided that that isn't geared to, the way it was structured, isn't geared to helping people of color. So I dropped it, and I just travel and I speak. And yeah, I don't know what the next thing is.
Yeah, I wanna transition to some questions. If we have some questions from the audience, I want to say that everything that you've shared with us is this kind of transformational thing. It makes me think of Octavia Butler, right? Where she writes like, everything you touch, you change, and everything you change changes you. So I'm imagining you all making these changes everywhere you go and being transformed yourselves. So we have some questions in the audience. Oh, right out the gate. Yes, right here.
I have the mic. Hey, homie. Being friends everywhere I go. Good evening. Thank you all so much for sharing. This question, so my dad was a part of the Young Lawyers Party, and my mom is very much like part of activists. I grew up in an activist family, but this question actually deals more with like myself and grief. So I've been dealing with like loss, and I'm not alone in that. We just went through a pandemic. And when you mentioned, when it was mentioned earlier that about losing people and like losing comrades, and I realized that my parents' generation, y'all generation, lost people all the time. So I was wondering advice about how to move forward with loss and grief, and how do you move forward? So I just wanted to know. That's probably something I can't ask my dad. So I'm asking y'all. Thank you.
That's a beautiful question, and it touches on a topic that we haven't touched on yet, and that is taking care of ourselves. Did we know how to do that? No, we didn't. No. And this seeking something familial and familiar after the party was over, and the party was over. It made me recall, your question and listening made me recall what I did when I was in solitary confinement and could only see my baby daughter for 1 hour every Saturday. Who makes this up? Is that one of June Jordan's poems? Do you know the poem I'm talking about? She's talking about, and who did this anyway? Anyway, find that June Jordan poem. And so I was in solitary grieving the death of John Huggins and my friend Al Prentice Carter, and missing my baby daughter. I had to dry up the breast milk. That's not something you want to do. That's not natural. And in solitary, one day I thought about how much I did not want to go out like this. I didn't want to be a sad and lonely person. And I asked my favorite lawyer in the whole world, I wish he was still living, Charlie Gary. Charlie, I see that you do a headstand before you enter the courtroom, any courtroom on any day, because that's what he would do in the lawyer client room at the courthouse in New Haven, in his suit. I go, Charlie, you do yoga every day? He says, yeah, I can't work without it. And I've always been attuned to more natural and I want to say spiritual ways of being rather than religious. That's just how I'm wired. And so I said, get me a book on yoga. And you know what? If you can find one that's on yoga and meditation, get it for me, would you? And he did. And the book had these pictures, these black and white photos of a woman doing very simple postures. I was incarcerated. I didn't have a teacher. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. The book said, after you stretch your body, sit still a while and breathe. And that was the beginning of a meditation practice that I keep to this day. Why? Because freedom is an inside job. I came to understand in that little solitary cell that I had power within me that nobody could take, no matter how much money or how many keys they had. This led me to heal from the grief of losing so many friends, but particularly my daughter's father, John. And then over the years, that has helped me to understand that if we are born, we will leave planet Earth. Hopefully not in violent ways, but we will leave. So we can live our lives fully, healing as we go and taking care of ourselves. Not in that mani-pedi, go to the spa kind of thing. No, it's like being a friend to yourself and befriending your mind. Your mind's not there to torture you. It's giving you information that could be helpful. And so you can be patient with yourself. And if you know what the grief is really about, you can look it in its face. That's what I had to do. And you can write or journal. You can sit still a while and breathe. You don't have to meditate. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not giving some prescription.
Thank you for that wisdom, Erica. I also thinking about a member of our community who passed away this week, Demetria Shabazz, and her husband, Amilcar, posted on Facebook today in Black with white letters that there's an African proverb that says that when we grieve, our sorrow is made lighter when we are sharing our sorrow. And I think the piece about being in community and having loved ones be with you and help you and hold you is another important piece of dealing with grief.
Can I give an example? My sister, as Ericka noted, we didn't know how to take care of ourselves in the movement. We just, as a matter of fact, the rules of discipline of the Young Lords said we work 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. So, and that meant that we were on call, we were organizing 24/7. And of course, then we would burn out because no one can sustain that kind of schedule. So I didn't really know how to take care of myself, except that my sister got sick, and it was my baby sister. And she was, at the time, she was 25. She was diagnosed with leukemia. And she got chemotherapy, the whole thing. And she went into remission. But 5 years later, she had a relapse. And so we tried to get her, we tested her for compatibility to get a bone marrow transplant. And 2 of my sisters were compatible, but I wasn't. So I was very sad because I was the oldest sister. We were 15 years apart, and I felt like somehow I had disappointed her. But she was very wise for her 15 years. She was also a Buddhist, which had helped her through her illness. And what she did was she gathered us together, to Pat's point about community. And she planned her passing. And she spoke to each family member what she thought about them, how she loved them, and how she congratulated, her nephew for a new job, or, to each one of us. And then she left us each a letter. And the only thing that she asked us was not to read her diary, because she said she had written stuff bad about all of us. But so my sisters and I, we were able to cry together and have that experience together. And I was just thinking about her because we're coming up on her 20th anniversary of her death. And so my sisters live in different states, but we decided we were going to do a Zoom. But anyway, I relied also on that energy. During the pandemic, I got sick. And for about 6 months, I was sick, and I was quite depressed, and I didn't want to see anybody. And my partner kept saying, shouldn't we call so-and-so and see if he wants to have brunch with us? And I kept saying, I don't want to see him. And he kept saying, are you mad at him, or did you have a fight? And I said, no, I just don't want to see anybody. I don't want to see anybody. I don't want to be around anybody. I was really, I don't know what the word is. What's the word? Self-indulgent, right? But I needed it. I'd been in the hospital and, a whole lot of stuff. But then this organization that I'm related to, Mi Gente, was having a big conference. And I always say this shoulder talks to this one. And this one said to this one, you know what? To get yourself out of this, you should go to that conference. You should be around community, right? So the process of buying the train ticket and all of that, and I got to the place, and in 3 days I was good as new. All the energy of all the young people, the conferences, the conversation, you know, they gave me energy. It's what you said about, you know, transforming and being transformed. And when I got back to the city, it's like a whole, I had a whole new opening, because all of a sudden I got this email, this beautiful email from this young man inviting me to speak somewhere. And then the next thing happened. And, you know, so it was, again, that being in community that helped with the loss. And I should say that we faced a lot of loss at that time, but now at our age, we face a lot of loss again, which is, you know, a different kind of loss, but loss nonetheless.
I know we are running a little tight on time, but I do want to take maybe 2 questions, maybe one from here, you've had your hand up, and then one from the Zoom, and then we can wrap up. But one of the things I wanted to kind of add to this, and what you made me think was in Puerto Rico, at the loss of someone at a wake or a funeral, it's common to say, te acompaño en tus sentimientos, I accompany you, right? In your grief, in your feeling. And so, you know, what you reminded me of is that is what came to mind immediately, te acompaño en tus sentimientos. But that is not just an accompaniment in grief and in those times, but there's an importance to having company in all the feelings, in the joy, right? In the beautiful times, as well as in those deeply sorrowful moments. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Second, mic is coming to you. No, it's so people on the internet can hear you. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the program. The CENTRO was born 50 years ago because of community struggle, including the young lords and others. Ethnic studies in all our universities really were born in San Francisco State University, others. They're all under threat. They're all under threat. We know that people don't want to learn about Black history or that there was slavery. Is that because of the disconnect with the community, and also or because academia is just not relating to the right topics, or so I just want to hear your comments on higher ed now and ethnic studies, Puerto Rican studies, et cetera.
Thank you. And we're going to take the Zoom question at the same time, and we'll wrap up.
Great. So one of the questions from Zoom is, what advice would you give to somebody looking to continue to share this history? Are there any organizations today that you work closely with?
I'd like to go to the first question here. I think the threat that we're under is all about our increasing power. We are becoming the multiplicity of BIPOC people, people of color in our nation is frightening people. We are beginning to be in places where we were not before. And what is encouraging about that, and what we have to remember, is that it is about our power. And this is where the threat is coming from. I don't want to leave today without naming Ana Celia Centella, who was a member of the Third World Women's Alliance, who taught here for many years at Hunter College, who started as part of the Alliance a guerrilla theater group called La Nueva Mujer. And I just want to squeeze her name in here because she's so important for us to all to remember. We had a lot going back to the coalition question, thinking also of Milagros Perez Huth, who was in Third World Women's Alliance and in the Young Lords Party. So we did a lot of mutual.
I just want to say really quickly that Ana Celia Centella, I did an interview with her when I was a grad student, and it was my first publication, and it was published in CENTRO Journal.
In terms of the question, we often get asked, what should we do to pass on this history? Call up a couple of your friends, start there. You know, sometimes we make it more complicated than it needs to be. It's everything that we've been talking about, that we were without resources. We didn't, our organizations, none of the movement got grants. You know, people have asked me, people have asked me, you know, so what kind of foundations gave you grants? Are you saying, you know? So, you know, start your own study groups, pass on the history that way, share a book with a family member. You know, I think sometimes we think grandiose, and we can start small with our community.
Thank you. Thank you both. I was thinking with the person who asked the question on Zoom, I was thinking about the reason for which I suggested that you watch the first Rainbow Coalition. One of the reasons, if you haven't already, but you could see it again, it's that great. It's a documentary. There's this one place in it where one of the men from the Young Patriots says he's asked the question, what do we do? There's this whole, it's so big, what do we do? And he says, stand at your front door. Look in front of you. There's something there, do it. Look to the left of you, there's something there. Look to the right of you, there's something there. Look behind you, there's something there. Do something. And when you said what you just said, that was how the party worked. We had the understanding of socialism and anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, but also we were willing not to just be in study group mode. We wanted to take an action, and there is just so much. You won't believe this when I tell you, but women are still being shackled in childbirth in prison. Do something. You don't have to overthink it or organize the whole thing. You don't need a 5-year plan. You just need to take a step, and then another one, and then another one. And that's something that we all learned over time. And the world needs young people willing to take simple actions to uplift.
I think it feels so overwhelming, right? But I think what you're telling me, what I hear is like our revolution needs graphic designers. It needs nurses, right? It doesn't need you to change your major. It needs doctors. It needs architects. It needs writers. It needs all of these things.
It needs you to also remember that beyond the academy, there is a whole world. And so go and look, visit the inside of a prison. Oh, you'll think of things to do. People don't understand what goes on in there, or they wouldn't say, yeah, I want him to go to jail. No, you don't. No, you don't, unless you want that person to, their heart to die. So yes, and there also is remembering why you're getting a degree, especially a doctoral degree, so that you can be the veritable spook who sat by the door. I don't know if you know that reference, but no, you can enter places like the fancier hotels have keys that you don't even, don't go there. But the thing is, think of it as a pass key to live the life of other people's dreams, live for other people's dreams to be met. And there are people here on this stage and in this audience who do that. If you have the opportunity to be in Jackie Brown's any one of her classes, you want to be in her class. It's because she brings herself. I hope you don't mind this, Jackie. No, I've been in her class. She brings herself to her classroom, her whole self, not just bits and pieces like they tell you to do. So I don't put down the academy, but recognize that you can use it. It's a tool. And our children really, 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 if you can't do anything else, talk to your children. If you have children or grandchildren, talk to them. Tell them the truth. Don't wait for somebody else to tell them the truth about how the world works. They're not going to get the whole truth from the television or the news, but they will believe you if you tell them the truth. And we still, in some communities, don't know how to do that.
I just want to add one thing, which is that in a place like New York City, there are tons of organizations. Volunteer somewhere. I even volunteer. I volunteered at CENTRO actually, with children. So there's a lot of great work that's happening. We should, in the course of this conversation, not forget that. People working, to stop forced sterilization in detention centers. People organizing in the workplace for women of color to get equal pay. There are a lot of different things that you can do, and you can volunteer.
Well, I want to thank you for spending this time with us and sharing with us with such openness and love and vulnerability, your stories and your advice. There's so many lessons that we can learn and still need to learn about how to make our way in this world. It's a treacherous path, but you've shed a light for us, right? So that we can see where we can go. So thank you.